My own son mocked me, laughing in front of his wife, saying, "You're poor. You have nothing left." I stayed silent, holding back my tears. But at the will reading, the lawyer paused, looked up, and said, "Actually, there's one more clause." When he finished, my son stopped smiling. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support more stories like this. My name is Eleanor Davis, and I am 68 years old. I never imagined I would live to see the day when my own child, the boy I raised with love and sacrifice, would look me in the eye and mock me. Yet that is exactly what happened. I was married to Thomas for 42 years. He was a hard-working man who built everything we had with his own hands. We didn't live a glamorous life, but we built a home filled with love, laughter, and memories. When Thomas passed, my world went quiet. The house we had shared felt emptier, and every corner carried the weight of his absence. But even in death, Thomas was thinking of me. He left behind a will, one I knew would change everything. My son Ryan, however, had become a very different man than the boy I once knew. At 40, he was ambitious and arrogant. He liked to flaunt his success and made sure everyone around him knew just how well he was doing. He wore tailored suits, drove expensive cars, and often reminded me, in not-so-subtle ways, that he believed he had surpassed his parents. His wife, Melissa, only made things worse. She encouraged his arrogance, whispering in his ear about investments, properties, and how much money he might gain once I was gone. She had a sharp tongue disguised behind polite smiles. More than once, I caught her glancing at my modest house as if it were beneath her. Family gatherings became painful. Instead of conversation filled with warmth, Ryan turned them into showcases of his wealth and achievements. I often sat quietly, listening to him boast, until the moment he would turn the spotlight on me. One night at dinner, he leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mom doesn't really have anything left, does she? Poor thing, just a house full of memories and no real value." Melissa laughed beside him, and I felt the sting of humiliation. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I had learned that answering his arrogance only fed it, but inside, I was heartbroken. How could my son, the child I had rocked to sleep, the boy who once held my hand on his first day of school, reduce me to nothing with a single cruel sentence? What Ryan didn't know, what neither he nor Melissa could have imagined, was that Thomas had prepared for this. My husband had seen the shift in Ryan long before I had admitted it to myself. Thomas loved his son, but he worried about the man Ryan had become, selfish, entitled, and careless with the people who loved him. That is why, in his will, Thomas included something special, a clause that would not just divide his estate, but test Ryan's character in a way he would never see coming. I carried this secret close to my heart. I stayed silent while Ryan boasted, while Melissa smirked, while they laughed at my expense, because I knew that soon, very soon, their confidence would be shattered. The truth would be revealed at the will reading, and my son would finally see the cost of his arrogance. The weeks after Thomas's passing were some of the hardest of my life. Every morning I woke to silence, and every night I went to bed alone in a house that suddenly felt too large for one person. I tried to keep myself busy, tending the garden, cooking small meals, and visiting neighbors when I had the strength. But grief has a way of following you no matter where you go. What hurt most was not just losing my husband, it was the way my son treated me during this vulnerable time. Ryan had always been ambitious, but in the months after his father's death, his ambition grew into something sharper, something uglier. He called me less to ask how I was doing, and more to ask about what Dad left behind. The words felt transactional, cold, as if my husband's life had been reduced to numbers on paper. One afternoon, I invited Ryan and Melissa over for dinner, hoping we could share a quiet meal and remember Thomas together. I cooked his favorite pot roast and set the table with the china we had only used on special occasions. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could sit together and feel like a family again. But as soon as they arrived, the air grew heavy. Ryan walked through the door, glancing around the house with the same critical eye Melissa often used. "Mom," he said, "this place is getting old. You really should think about selling. You could move into something smaller, more manageable. Melissa chimed in with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ryan's right, Eleanor. A place like this doesn't really suit you anymore. And let's be honest, the value of this property could go a long way if invested properly. I forced a smile and said nothing. Inside, I felt small, as if the years of love and memories I had built with Thomas inside these walls meant nothing to them. The house wasn't just brick and wood. It was the place where Ryan had taken his first steps, where birthday candles had been blown out, where Christmas mornings were filled with laughter. But to him, it was simply an asset waiting to be cashed in. Dinner only grew worse. Ryan leaned back in his chair, twirling his glass of wine, and said in front of Melissa, "Mom, you don't have much left. You're comfortable for now, but really, what do you have without Dad? He was the one who built everything." His words sliced through me. I bit my tongue, blinking back tears, but Melissa chuckled softly, as if to confirm his cruelty. Daniel Caldwell, the family lawyer and Thomas's old friend, had joined us for the meal as well. He stayed mostly quiet, observing. When Ryan made that remark, I noticed the lawyer's eyes flicker toward me with sympathy. But he didn't say anything. He knew what was written in Thomas's will. He knew Ryan's arrogance would soon meet its reckoning. Still, the humiliation I felt in that moment was unbearable. My own son, mocking me in my own home, reducing my worth to nothing more than what he assumed was left in a bank account. I excused myself to the kitchen to gather my composure, gripping the counter until my hands stopped trembling. In the days that followed, Ryan's behavior only grew more brazen. He called Melissa within earshot, laughing about how the estate would soon be his to control. "She doesn't have much, but whatever's left, it'll be ours soon enough," I overheard him say once while pretending not to listen. My heart ached, but I stayed quiet. What Ryan never understood was that Thomas had prepared for this moment. He had seen through Ryan's pride and greed long before I did, and in his will, he had written a clause that would ensure his son would face the consequences of his disrespect. I carried that secret like a shield. Every time Ryan smirked, every time Melissa made a cutting remark, every time they dismissed me as poor or irrelevant, I reminded myself, they don't know what's coming. Finally, the day of the will reading was scheduled. Ryan showed up to my house in a brand new suit, Melissa on his arm, both of them looking like they were attending a celebration instead of a solemn occasion. He clapped his hands together and said with a grin, "Well, Mom, this should be interesting. Let's see what Dad really left behind." I said nothing, only nodded. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. I had endured the humiliation, the laughter, the cruel words. Soon, all of it would come to an end. At that table, in front of the lawyer, Ryan would learn that money was not the only thing his father had left behind. The morning of the will reading, I woke before sunrise. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope Thomas had given to Mr. Caldwell years earlier. I remembered the night Thomas wrote it. His illness had already begun to weaken him, but his mind was sharp, his resolve unshaken. He had looked at me across the table, his voice steady, and said, "Eleanor, I want to make sure you're protected. Ryan has lost his way, and if something happens to me, I don't want you left at his mercy." At the time, I had resisted. "Thomas, he's our son. He'll come around. He just needs time." But Thomas had shaken his head. "I hope you're right, but just in case, I'm leaving something in writing, a clause he won't see coming." That memory carried me through as I dressed in a simple navy dress and walked to the lawyer's office later that morning. I didn't want to go in looking triumphant or proud. This wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, about honoring the husband who had loved me enough to think ahead. When I arrived, Ryan and Melissa were already there. Ryan was leaning casually against the wall in his expensive suit, his arm draped around Melissa. She was scrolling through her phone, her lips curved into a smug smile. As soon as Ryan saw me, he smirked. "There she is! Mom, you look nice. Nervous?" I simply shook my head. "No, Ryan, not nervous." Melissa chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "It must feel strange, knowing everything your husband worked for is about to be passed down. Don't worry, we'll take good care of it." Their arrogance no longer stung me. If anything, it gave me strength. I clutched my purse a little tighter and reminded myself, they don't know what's coming. We were ushered into Mr. Caldwell's office, a warm but formal room lined with bookshelves and heavy wooden furniture. The lawyer sat at his desk, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, the will resting in front of him. He greeted me with a respectful nod before turning to Ryan and Melissa. "Shall we begin?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, his hands folded smugly across his chest. Melissa sat upright, eyes bright with anticipation. I sat quietly, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Mr. Caldwell began reading the will. His voice was steady, professional, as he outlined the assets Thomas had left behind: the house, the savings, the modest investments. Ryan's smirk widened with each item. He glanced at Melissa, whispering, "Just as we thought." She squeezed his hand, her face glowing with satisfaction. I watched silently, my heart beating faster with every line. I could feel the tension in the room growing, though Ryan was too blinded by greed to notice. Finally, Mr. Caldwell reached the point in the will where the main division of assets was stated. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor, I leave the right to remain in our home and access to our joint accounts. To my son, Ryan, I leave—" Ryan straightened in his chair, a victorious smile spreading across his face. He interrupted. "There it is. Go on." But Mr. Caldwell didn't finish right away. He paused, cleared his throat, and looked directly at me. His eyes softened, as if he knew the moment had come. Then he looked back at Ryan. "Actually, there's one more clause." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and sharp. Melissa blinked in confusion. Ryan's smile faltered, his brows knitting together. "What do you mean, one more clause?" Mr. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. "Your father left specific instructions. He wrote that in the event his son, Ryan, showed disrespect or neglect toward his mother, Eleanor, his inheritance would be revoked and transferred fully to her." The room fell silent. My breath caught in my chest. Ryan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her confident smile gone. Mr. Caldwell went on, his tone calm but firm. "Your father documented his concerns clearly. He valued respect above money, and he wanted to ensure that Eleanor was treated with dignity. Based on the evidence provided and the conversations I had with him before his passing, I am legally bound to honor his request." Ryan's face turned red, his fists tightening on the armrests of his chair. "That's ridiculous! He wouldn't do that to me!" But deep down, I think he knew it was exactly what his father would do. I sat still, my heart pounding, but I didn't speak yet. I wanted the weight of Thomas's words to settle fully before I said anything at all. That was the moment, the turning point, when arrogance began to crumble and truth stepped into the light. The silence in Mr. Caldwell's office was so thick you could almost hear the clock ticking on the wall. Ryan's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. He sat frozen for a moment, his face flushed, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Melissa shifted beside him, her lips parted in shock, the phone she had been holding now resting forgotten on her lap. Finally, Ryan found his voice, but it came out louder and harsher than before. "This is insane! My own father wouldn't do this to me. He knew I was supposed to inherit what he built. He knew I deserved it." Mr. Caldwell, calm as ever, adjusted his glasses and replied evenly, "Mr. Davis, your father was very clear. He wanted his estate to reflect not just financial value, but the values he lived by: respect, responsibility, and care for your mother. These were his exact words. If my son cannot show dignity to his own mother, he is not worthy of what I leave behind." Melissa reached for Ryan's arm, whispering urgently, "Ryan, stop. Don't make this worse." But he shook her off, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes darting between the lawyer and me. "This has to be a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "There's no way he wrote that. He would never cut me out like this." "Mom," his eyes turned on me suddenly, sharp and accusing. "You knew about this, didn't you? You put him up to it." The accusation stung, but I stayed calm. I had nothing to hide. I looked at my son, my grown son, who had once clutched my hand on his first day of school, who I had stayed awake with through fevers, who I had sacrificed for, and said softly, "No, Ryan, I didn't put him up to anything. This was your father's choice. He saw the way you treated me. He wanted to make sure I was protected." Ryan's face twisted in anger and humiliation. Protected? Protected from what? From me? I'm your son. His voice cracked again, the bravado slipping as reality sank in. Melissa, now pale, tried to salvage the situation. Mr. Caldwell, surely there's some way to contest this. A clause like that can't just stand. It's unreasonable. But the lawyer shook his head firmly. It is legally binding. Your father anticipated objections and worded it carefully. The estate passes fully to Eleanor. There is no loophole. The weight of those words settled in the room like a final verdict. Melissa sank back into her chair, silent for once, her eyes flicking toward Ryan with a mix of shock and disappointment. Ryan's chest heaved with frustration. He looked at me again, his voice breaking now. So that's it? After everything, you get it all, and I get nothing? You sit there smiling, while I interrupted, my voice steady, but not unkind. I'm not smiling, Ryan. This isn't about taking from you. It's about teaching you what matters. Your father wanted you to understand that money is nothing without respect. He gave you every chance to treat me with kindness, but you chose mockery. You chose arrogance. This isn't me punishing you. This is your father's final lesson. For the first time, Ryan looked truly defeated. His eyes dropped to the table, his fists loosening against the wood. His whole body slumped as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Melissa muttered something under her breath, but Ryan didn't respond. He seemed lost in his own shame, caught between anger and realization. The silence stretched on, broken only by Mr. Caldwell closing the folder of papers with finality. The reading is complete, he said gently. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress with trembling hands. My legs felt heavy, but my heart was lighter than it had been in years. I looked at Ryan one last time. Your father loved you. Don't ever forget that. But love doesn't excuse cruelty. He wanted you to remember that respect is worth more than any inheritance. Ryan's lips parted as if he wanted to reply, but no words came out. His eyes glistened, whether with anger or something else, I couldn't tell. Melissa stood, gathering her things with sharp, jerky movement. Come on, Ryan, she muttered, tugging at his arm. We're done here. But Ryan didn't move right away. He stayed seated, staring at the table, his shoulders slumped, the arrogance stripped from him completely. Eventually, he rose slowly, his steps heavy, as he followed Melissa out the door. He didn't look back. As the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Mr. Caldwell gave me a kind smile. Thomas knew what he was doing, Ellen. He wanted to make sure you were safe. Today, his words did exactly that. I nodded, tears pricking my eye. Yes, I whispered. He protected me, even when he wasn't here. That moment was the turning of the tide. For years I had endured Ryan's mockery, his dismissive words, his cold laughter. But now, in front of the woman who had encouraged his arrogance and the lawyer who represented his father's legacy, the truth had been spoken. Respect had been restored. When I stepped out of Mr. Caldwell's office that afternoon, the weight I had been carrying for months seemed to lift from my shoulders. The autumn air felt crisp against my skin, and for the first time since Thomas's passing, I felt like I could breathe freely. The will reading had not only secured my future, but had given me something far more valuable: dignity. Ryan and Melissa hurried down the steps ahead of me. Melissa's heels clicked sharply on the pavement, her face tight with frustration, while Ryan lagged behind, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the ground. For the first time in years, my son didn't have a smirk on his face. He didn't call out to me. He didn't try to defend himself. He was silent, trapped in the realization that his arrogance had cost him everything his father had worked for. I watched them walk away, my heart torn. I wasn't celebrating his humiliation. No mother truly finds joy in seeing her child broken. What I felt was a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that Ryan had become the man Thomas feared he would, and relief that Thomas's final lesson had been delivered so powerfully that even Ryan couldn't deny it. That evening, back at home, I sat in the living room holding a framed picture of Thomas. His steady eyes seemed to look back at me, calm and wise as always. You knew what you were doing, I whispered aloud. You knew he needed to hear this in a way only you could say it. I pressed the picture to my chest and let the tears fall freely. But these tears were different. They weren't only for grief, they were for gratitude. Gratitude that I had been loved by a man who thought not just of the present, but of the future, who protected me even when he was gone. The days that followed were quiet. Melissa didn't call, and Ryan didn't visit. The silence in itself was an answer. I imagined he was too ashamed to face me, or perhaps too angry to admit what had happened. But I didn't chase after him. For too long, I had been the one trying to mend things, the one who stayed silent when he mocked me, the one who allowed him to bruise my dignity for the sake of keeping peace. Now, it was his turn to reflect. Daniel Caldwell stopped by a few days later to check on me. He brought a pie from his wife and sat with me at the kitchen table. "Eleanor," he said gently, "Thomas did what he thought was best. He wanted to make sure you were not only cared for, but respected. I hope you know you are always his greatest priority." I nodded, my hands folded around my teacup. "I know, and I think in the end, his words reached Ryan more than mine ever could. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day, Ryan will understand what he lost. And why." Daniel smiled. "That's exactly what Thomas hoped for." As the weeks turned into months, I noticed small changes. A card arrived in the mail, unsigned, but written in Ryan's handwriting. "I'm sorry, Mom. It wasn't much, but it was something." I placed it in a drawer, not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to give him time. Change doesn't happen overnight, but the first crack in his pride had been made, and through that crack, maybe, just maybe, something better could grow. In the meantime, I focused on my own healing. I spent mornings in the garden, afternoons reading by the window, evenings writing letters to my grandchildren. I donated part of the inheritance to a local charity that Thomas and I had always supported quietly. It felt right to honor him that way, not by hoarding wealth, but by spreading the love he had always lived by. Looking back now, I realized that the money, the property, the accounts, none of that truly mattered. What mattered was the message Thomas left behind. He made it clear that respect cannot be bought, that love cannot be faked, and that arrogance always has a cost. He taught our son one last lesson, and through that, he gave me peace. My son once mocked me, saying I had nothing left, but the truth is, I had more than he could ever imagine. I had love, I had dignity, and I had the strength of a husband who cared enough to protect me with his final words. Ryan thought I was poor, but that day proved I was richer than he would ever understand. To anyone listening, let this be a reminder. What you say to the people who love you matters. Mockery leaves scars, but respect leaves legacies. Choose carefully, because one day, your words may be remembered more than your wealth. And if this story touched you, please subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.